Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today, we're going to be tackling a topic that I think a lot of people have probably wondered about at some point,
Hmm.
introversion versus autism.
Yeah.
We've got some really fascinating sources lined up that are going to help us kind of like pick apart these two concepts and really figure out,
Yeah.
where do these lines get blurry and where are they actually crystal clear?
Yeah, I think it's super important to understand the nuances, right?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
these terms do get used interchangeably sometimes, and that can lead to a lot of misunderstandings.
Absolutely. So to kind of set the stage here, let's define what we're talking about.
Yeah.
One of our sources, Cheap ABA, points out that introversion is a personality trait,
Yeah.
and it really has to do with how you gain energy.
Hmm.
So for introverts, that means needing quiet time to kind of recharge.
Yeah, and it's not so much about being like antisocial.
Right.
It's more about finding social interaction draining. Like an introvert might love going to parties,
Yeah.
but they'll probably need some serious downtime afterward to recover.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. Like you could enjoy a big concert,
Right.
but then really need like a quiet night in afterward to balance things out.
Exactly.
Okay, so now let's shift gears a little bit to autism.
Okay.
And here's where things get, I think, a little more complex.
Yeah.
So our source describes autism as a neurodevelopmental difference, and it affects communication, social interactions, behaviors, and sensory processing.
And it's really important to emphasize, I think, that autism is a spectrum,
Yes.
meaning it manifests differently in each person.
Yeah.
You can't assume all autistic people are going to act or behave the same way. Each
Right.
person's experience is unique.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
So some people might experience just a few of these traits while others experience a lot of them.
Yeah.
And, those traits themselves can vary in intensity too.
Right.
Okay, so our source actually lists some specific examples that I found really interesting.
Okay, they'll go ahead.
So, like, difficulty picking up on social cues, which could lead to, like, some awkward situations.
Sure.
Or, sensory sensitivities where, like, say, the hum of a fluorescent light might be incredibly distracting to one person while another person might not even notice it.
Yeah, or like certain textures
Yes.
that might be really irritating or
Exactly.
really appealing.
Yeah, and let's not forget about, like, the intense, passionate interests
Oh, yeah.
that some autistic individuals have.
Uh-huh.
Like, they might just dive deep into a specific topic that might seem unusual to people who don't share that same passion.
Right.
So we've kind of explored what introversion is, and
Yeah.
we've touched on autism a little bit,
Uh-huh.
but it seems like there's some overlap here, right?
Yeah.
Like, both introverts and autistic people might prefer being alone sometimes. So where's that dividing line? What's the real distinction?
So I think the key difference is understanding the motivation behind that preference for solitude.
Okay.
So introverts choose it to recharge their batteries, while autistic individuals might avoid social situations because of specific challenges they face.
That's interesting. So for someone on the spectrum,
Yeah.
that avoidance might stem from things like sensory overload, struggling to understand social rules, or even anxiety in social settings.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the idea of like self-awareness,
Okay.
introverts generally have a solid grasp of their own needs
Yeah.
and can adapt to social situations when they need to, even if it takes some effort.
Mm-hmm.
But for autistic individuals, self-awareness and masking their differences to fit in
Yeah.
can be a much bigger challenge.
That's really helpful, I think, for understanding why, these behaviors can be totally different, even if they look similar on the surface. It's
Yeah.
important to consider the underlying reasons behind why someone's acting the way they are.
The motivation, yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it really highlights the importance of empathy and informed observation, wouldn't you say?
Absolutely. We can't just rely on surface level judgments. We really have to dig a little deeper to understand where someone is coming from.
Yeah.
Our source makes a really important point about recognizing both introversion and autism as valid ways of being. It's not about saying one is better or worse, just that they're different.
I completely agree. There's no right way to experience the world. It's
Yeah.
all about, recognizing and respecting those differences.
Totally. This actually brings up an interesting question because our source touches on the idea that people often misunderstand or misinterpret behaviors related to introversion or autism.
Oh, for sure.
So I'm curious, what are some common misconceptions that you've encountered?
Well, one common misconception is that all introverts are shy or socially awkward.
Right.
In reality, A lot of introverts enjoy social interaction, but they just need that time alone to recharge.
Yeah, so someone might be the life of the party, but then crave solitude afterward.
Exactly.
That kind of makes me think of another misconception, which is that autistic people lack empathy.
Yeah, that's a harmful stereotype that needs to be challenged.
Absolutely.
Autistic individuals may express empathy differently,
Yeah.
but that doesn't mean they don't feel it.
Right. For example, our source mentioned that some autistic people might struggle with understanding nonverbal cues like facial expressions or tone of voice.
Yeah.
But that doesn't mean they don't care about other people's feelings.
Exactly. It just
Yep.
means they process social information differently.
Mm-hmm.
And this highlights the importance of clear communication and patience. You
Yeah.
know,
Yeah.
we need to create spaces where people feel comfortable communicating in their own way.
I'm curious about something. Our source mentioned masking, which is when autistic people try to hide their autistic traits to fit in.
Right?
Can you talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, masking can be incredibly exhausting. It's like constantly putting on a performance,
Yeah.
trying to suppress your natural instincts and behaviors.
Right.
While it might help some autistic individuals navigate social situations,
Yeah.
it can also lead to burnout and mental health challenges.
It sounds like it could take a real toll.
Oh, yeah.
So how can we move towards a society that embraces neurodiversity instead of forcing people to mask who they are?
That's a big question. But I think it starts with education and awareness.
Yeah.
The more we understand about autism and other neurodevelopmental differences,
Uh-huh.
the more equipped we are to create accepting and inclusive environments.
And a big part of that, I think, is challenging our own assumptions and biases, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
We need to be mindful of the language we use
Mm-hmm.
and avoid making generalizations.
Yeah.
Remember, every autistic person is an individual with their own unique strengths, challenges, and experiences.
It's about treating people as individuals, not stereotypes. Like,
Exactly.
we need to move away from that one-size-fits-all mentality.
Exactly. And that includes recognizing that there's no right way to be introverted or autistic.
Right.
There's a whole spectrum of experiences within each category.
This all kind of comes back to that key theme of understanding and acceptance, doesn't it?
It really does.
We need to create a world where everyone feels seen, heard, and valued for who they are, not who we expect them to be.
I couldn't agree more. It's about celebrating neurodiversity and recognizing the value that different perspectives bring to our communities and society as a whole.
So thinking practically, what are some steps we can take to create more inclusive spaces in our own lives?
Okay.
Maybe at work, school, or even within our families.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I think it's something we can all be more mindful of. One simple step is to just be aware of our own communication styles
Okay.
and how they might impact others. For example, some autistic individuals might find it difficult to process like rapid-fire conversations
Uh-huh.
or loud environments.
So being mindful of things like speaking pace and volume
Exactly.
can make a big difference.
Absolutely. And being patient with different communication styles is also really key.
Yeah.
Some autistic individuals might take a little longer to process information or respond to questions.
Right. It's about respecting those differences and creating a space where everyone feels comfortable communicating in their own way.
Exactly.
Our source also touched on the importance of sensory considerations.
Yeah,
Like some autistic people might be sensitive to bright lights or strong smells.
exactly. So being aware of those sensitivities and making accommodations when possible
Yeah.
can create a more welcoming environment. For example, having a designated quiet space
Oh, that's a good idea.
where someone can decompress if they're feeling overwhelmed can be incredibly helpful.
Those are some really practical tips that I think anyone can implement,
Mhm.
regardless of their own neurotype. It all comes back to that idea of empathy and understanding.
It really does. And remember, creating inclusive spaces is an ongoing process.
Yeah.
It's about being open to learning, adapting, and constantly striving to do better.
So we've covered a lot of ground in this deep dive.
We have.
We've explored the differences between introversion and autism. We've debunked some common misconceptions, and we've even discussed practical ways to create more inclusive spaces. If you had to distill all of this down to one key message for our listeners, what would it be?
I think the most important takeaway is that we need to move away from these rigid categories and embrace the full spectrum of human neurodiversity.
Okay.
Both introversion and autism are simply variations in how our brains are wired, and neither is inherently good or bad.
It's about recognizing those differences as strengths, not weaknesses.
Exactly.
And appreciating the unique perspectives and talents that each individual brings to the table.
Precisely. The world would be a much richer and more vibrant place if we all embraced this idea of neurodiversity
Yeah.
and celebrated the beautiful tapestry of human experience.
Well said. We've learned so much in this deep dive, and I hope our listeners have too. Remember, this is just the beginning of the conversation. We encourage you to continue exploring these topics, challenge your own assumptions, and advocate for a world where everyone feels valued and respected for who they are.
Until next time, keep those minds open and stay curious.